All right. Okay. Now, uh, so I hope this works for you. What we're doing. So remember, there's no such thing as a language by itself. Language is very commonly known as language culture. And so each week or so, I try to bring you the something with Gaelic culture, Gaelic history, Gaelic culture. So, so I hope this works for you. But tonight I want to talk about shealladh, the two sites, often known as second sight, but in Gaelic it really refers to two sites. And so I'm gonna, so I'll spend a few minutes talking about this. I try to make these presentations short, but to give us an idea of what's going on. So the second sight is the ability to see both this world and the other world. So the other world, what we call, what might be called the other world, is a very important concept in Gaelic culture. And this ability to see into the other world, or to see, and very often it has to do with premonitions, seeing things that are yet to happen, or seeing things at a distance. Sometimes that have to be interpreted. This is taken quite seriously historically in the Gaelic culture, and if you ever get a Gael, with a couple glasses of whiskey in him, he'll admit to still believing in it. Okay. Now, one of the things about second sight is it's not willed, it's not voluntary. Sometimes people with second sight, wish they didn't have it. Sometimes seen as a bit of a burden. Okay, all right. So, in Adahul, the two worlds of the living and the dead, or the living and the fairy folk, or the present and the future. So it's a little vaguely defined. And even the fairy folk, the fairies, are not quite defined. I mean, sometimes, so it's not like a doctrine. Okay, thing to understand about this folk mythology, if you will. It's not like a doctrine written down, and it's got to be one thing or another. Sometimes the fairy folk are the very distant ancestors of the previous inhabitants of the Celtic lands, and sometimes they're the dead. Sometimes they're just inhabitants of this other world. Okay. But second sight is seen as a gift of communication with the ancestors or the spirit world. And in this, it kind of predates the Christian influx into the Celtic lands. It's a look into the really ancient Celtic mythology or religion, and it is linked to the bard, the poet, the seer, the druid, the ancient religious leaders, and has to do with vision as well. The sight of those things not seen, or the vision of those things not seen, and very often, people with second sight or bards, are taken to be blind. So they can't see things in this world, but they see things in the other world. Okay. So, okay. Now, the official church, or the mostly the Protestant church, frowned on second sight. Okay, but on the concept of second sight, but it was so deeply embedded in Gaelic culture that it could not be rooted out, even though the very strict Presbyterian and Protestant church tried to. Okay. Now, one of the interesting things is that in the 1600s, all over Europe, witches were being chased down and burned to the stake. There was very little persecution of witches or supposed witches. Okay, because for the most part, they weren't really they weren't really witches at all. Okay, very often just poor people, very often women. who got on the wrong side of somebody and was accused of being a witch. But there's very little of that in the Gael-Talk, the Gaelic-speaking areas of Scotland, and because this whole concept of being in touch with the spirit world was so widely accepted, it didn't bother anybody that there was a witch around or somebody who could see, speak to the dead or have visions of the future. It didn't bother anybody, right? Okay, so there's very little. There's actually only a couple different cases, recorded cases of people being persecuted for witchcraft in the Highlands, and those are located in trading towns where there's a heavily English influence. Damn those English. Okay. Anyway. Okay. This is an account from somebody who actually is a Gaelic speaker who wrote a book about the Western Isles, and he writes, the second sight is a singular faculty of seeing an otherwise invisible object without any previous means used by the person that sees it for that end. The vision makes such a lively impression upon the seers that they neither see nor think of anything else except the vision, as long as it continues. And then they appear pensive and jovial according to the object which was represented to them. Okay, so they saw this thing, and if it foretold death, then they'd be sad, and or it could be a wedding. Oh, somebody's going to get married, so we're very happy. But anyway, that's okay. A recent writer and seer, Ellie Watt. And by recent, I mean, like I think she wrote this book. It's in the, I have it someplace here. Anyway, like the 1980s or something like that. So, so she was live in the second half of the 20th century. Describes in various ways gun is, or ganosh, without rest. She describes on Da Helach as a gift and a failing, or a fault, or a curse, and she's very conflicted about it. I mean, it's just something that she had all her life, she says, and she foresaw the death of her oldest son, for instance. But in trying to protect him, she left her youngest son vulnerable, and he died in an accident she had seen, befalling her other son. So, and Watt argues that if this seems to be contrary to the law of nature, it's only because we're unfamiliar with the complete laws of nature. It's only according to the law of nature that we understand. Okay, anyway, all right. Okay, now the most famous, the legendary seer is the bronze seer, Connach Oher, Kenneth the Sallow, that is,
Yes.
and anyway, not tanned, okay, from the mid 1600s, okay. So he acquired his divining pebble from the dead, and so he and his mother were traveling at night, and they encountered the ghost of a Danish princess. The Danes used to rule in this part of the country, and the princess wanted to get back to her grave, and the mother demanded a price, a ransom, and which was the powers of prophecy for her son. And so her son found this pebble on a shealladh, a fairy mount, and he was able to look, again, sight, right? Able to look through the hole, as the picture shows, in the pebble, and see the future. Okay. Now, okay, the prophecies. Now, let's see, do I have that? Yeah. Okay. Now his prophecies are, and so 50 years more after his death, he foretold Culloden, the disastrous battle of Culloden. O Dromacy, it's Dromacy in Gaelic. Thy bleak moor shall, ere many generations have passed, be stained with the best blood of the Highlands. It'll be a fearful period. Heads will be lopped off by the score, and no mercy shall be shown or quarter given on either side. Okay. He foretold the Highland clearances. more than 100 years after his death. The sheep shall eat the men.
Mhm.
When the landowners evicted the inhabitants of the highlands in order to bring in sheep that were more profitable. Okay, the North Sea oil, 200 years
Yeah.
after his death, a black rain will bring riches to Aberdeen. So here's the Aberdeen's on the east coast here, and there's the North Sea oil. Okay, and Scotland would have its own parliament again.
Yeah.
And this was something unimaginable. But it would only come when men could walk dry shod from England to France. That is, walk on land from England to France. And of course, that happened figuratively. Nobody walks the channel, but the English channel was traversed by the Channel Tunnel in 1994. And a few years after that, the first Parliament in Scotland in 400 years opened up. And who knows, maybe Scotland will be free once again soon. Unfortunately, and I can't, and sometimes I get a little cynical, but he didn't see this one coming, right? Anyway, so the wife of the local nobleman, Isabella, wanted news of her husband who was on a visit to Paris. Well, what's he doing in Paris? What's he doing in France? Why do okay. So Cognac assured her that the Earl was in good health, but didn't elaborate. Isabella demanded that he tell her everything, or she would have him killed. So then forced, he told her that her husband with another woman who was more beautiful than she was. Okay. And now she was so incensed that he had him thrown into a barrel of boiling tar. Okay. But before his death, he foretold the end of the Seaforth line, that is, the family, with the last heir being deaf and dumb, which also came to pass. So I guess you could say he had the last word. Okay. Anyway, so now a little psychology. For those who believe this is just mythology, it's Carl Jung, one of the founders of modern psychology, okay, who wrote that there's no reason whatsoever to assume that all so-called psychic phenomena are illusionary effects of our mental processes. Okay. So anyway, so he said there was something there. So Carl Jung thought there was something there. And as I said, even today in the Highlands, as Ian Thompson wrote, no Highlander has any doubt about the existence of the second sight, or indeed simple prognostication. It's still widely believed. But as I said, now there's the Gaels have been suppressed for so long that a lot of times, they won't open themselves up to people they consider outsiders. So you just can't go up to a Highlander in the street and say, well, do you believe in second sight? But if they know you, they trust you, they've accepted you, they'll enter into a serious conversation with you. I've heard professors, talking about this and seriously considering it and recounting the instances they have experienced or people they know who have experienced second sight. But they won't. But I've heard the same people, the same professors, give a talk about it as if it were just an abstract academic event, and they won't admit to any kind of belief system of their own. Okay, so and in similar ways, very often Gaelic speakers, maybe less and less nowadays, but at least historically, again, you could go up to somebody in the Highlands and ask them if they spoke Gaelic, and they go, oh no, that's an old language. We don't speak it here, because again, the language and the culture have been so suppressed. But this is still a widely held phenomenon and belief system. Okay.